It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So today we're joined by a very special guest. And we really didn't think we was going to have any guests on for a while, but we are pleasantly surprised to introduce to you Epic B.
Hey, how's it going?
Right. So do you want to tell us a bit about yourself as well, Epic B?
Yeah, so I'm a music producer, recording artist, DJ. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a pioneer of a music genre called FDM. Well, one of the pioneers.
Yeah, because we've been listening to your work actually quite a lot of the day, and really getting into it. I had checked your stuff out before, but I thought I could do with a bit of a refresher. And it almost like had me thinking like I was gonna go on a night out or something. It was really like hyping us up. I think when we was setting everything up.
100%.
It was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the point of FDM. If you don't feel like dancing, if it's not giving you energy, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah, because the beat is sort of supposed to like go with the dance moves. It's sort of like it feeds back into itself, doesn't it? As in the music is sort of derived from the dance floor culture.
Yeah, in Brooklyn is a heavily Caribbean influence on a lot of the things that goes on. And in the early 2000s, there was a dance style that was coming out of Brooklyn called flexing. It was a Brooklyn show that came on to the locals, and it was a bunch of different dance crews, and they would just go up there and battle and just dance against other crews and try to win. And a lot of it was like dance hall beats mixed with like Evanescence or just a bunch of crazy blends that you wouldn't like normally hear. And it started just going crazy, and a lot of the dancers started like branching out and doing shows. Or one of the dance crews actually was on like MTV's ABDC, and it kind of shed a lot of light on it, and the culture kept growing, and they started becoming like producers. There was already like DJs, but it started being producers actually making music for the dancers to dance to, and that's how FDM came about.
And did that sort of elevate the dancing? Do you think like when people started making music specifically for that scene, do you think like the dancing also came up in its own right?
Yeah, the dancers went crazy. It was something that was specifically made for them. So a lot of their movement was like in the details. So when we would do certain transitions, it would make the dancers do certain moves. And it felt more connected to what the dancer was trying to bring, because the DJs before us would do all these blends that gave us like the outline, but
yeah, as
producers we were able to bring certain elements that you couldn't blend, like you had to create, and it was just perfect.
It sounds like from where we're from, where there's like club culture, but it's not quite the same as what you're talking about. And I think it's so fascinating to hear how the music and the dancing specifically sort of creates its own thing that wasn't previously there, and sort of they elevate each other in a way. I think that's fascinating. And, today, like on this podcast, we talk a lot about the tech, and because of the dance hall influence, you've been like chasing down certain sounds like and brands like say Emu, and do you find like these products and this sort of approach to sound design is something that you sort of nostalgic for from the influence from dance hall and stuff in flex dance music?
Yeah, a lot of the old 90s dance hall songs were kind of like how in Jungle they have these breaks that are like iconic breaks.
Yes, yeah. Like the almond break and stuff.
Yeah. So in FDM, there was like these breaks that you would use for like a lot of the tracks as the bass line. And it's a lot of old school production. A lot of the production from War 21 which is like a big dance hall group. They influenced the sound of FDM, and we started using those as like the guidelines, and then creating our own patterns and our own sounds. And a lot of people have their own flows. Like, there's so many different FDM producers, and everybody attacks it different. That's what makes it cool and fun, and the dancers know which artists they want to hear music from. But me, I'm not a dancer. I'm not a dancer, and I'm not Caribbean. But growing up in Brooklyn, there's so many like different Caribbean cultures. So as a child, I always heard all of these things. So for me, a lot of it came from what I known already, which was these old school dancehall songs. So for me, I really I sought out for those sounds because it stayed true to my childhood.
And we're sort of doing the same in like a very different pocket. Like we said about last week, we've been chasing down this thing called a Rockman. We grew up on like 70s and 80s classic rock music. That's what really, I don't know why, but that's what really got us and what really captured our attention. And we've been doing a similar thing, but with sort of a different genre and a different set of equipment. But I do think like when you can chase down one of those things or even just discover that they used this particular sound or this particular instrument, you can go, well, is there any virtual recreations or can I get my hands on the real thing? And it sort of spares you on. Like when you're making a genre of music, it's fascinating to feel like you're getting closer to what your heroes are doing. But at the same time, the tracks like in the flex dance music scene also hit really, really hard. Like they're punchy tracks. Like they've got that
too. Yeah,
they've got that modern production edge to them as well.
Yeah, that's because being from New York is a lot of hip hop influences. So hip hop is known for things to be like punchy and heavy. So it's still staying true to the sounds that we know and love, and it creates that interesting blend because dancehall, it obviously it came from the Caribbean, but us being from New York, that like and hearing those sounds, although we may not be from the Caribbean, we may not have that like original like I guess essence of dancehall. Our recreation of it and the blends that we are surrounded by creates this whole new thing that I don't know, it just creates this energy.
It feels like more than the sum of its parts.
It evolves almost. Like everybody who makes it evolves one step from where it was because everybody interprets music differently. And then you take those influences and then you regurgitate it out into something that's almost different but rooted in the same style,
coming from the same place, but it has its own sort of characteristics that maybe in your mind it's like this sounds exactly like these old influences, but in reality if somebody else were to listen to it, they're hearing all this new sort of sound work and like say about punchy mixing, because when you go back and listen to older music, a lot of it isn't super punchy. It's quite dynamic. It's quite soft sometimes, even when it's not meant to be, because the technology has evolved so much. You can really push music into people's faces now with like the technology. So I find that's fascinating in itself.
Yeah, it kind of like when I think of FDM, the closest thing I can think of is jungle. It's they had the same similar I guess upbringing. Like they both stem from like dance hall.
Yeah.
But just the music and the influence of just London or just the UK, created this whole new like type of dance hall. And I didn't really know about jungle when I started making FDM, but like a couple years later, I started listening to it, and it was really like the way they chop up the vocals and the drums are like the most prominent things, the drums and the bass. It just it was kind of mind blowing. It made me want to dig deeper into jungle, and learning more stuff about jungle actually gave me more insight on old school dance hall and what they were doing, and it just came full circle. Yeah, and like you said, when you find those sounds that you've heard growing up, it's just like this, like, I don't know, like this Heaven's Gate moment. It's like, wow, I really found epiphany. Yeah, it's crazy. And I heard when I found you guys on Reason, just listening to the demos, I was just like, no, right away, these are the sounds I'm looking for.
Yeah, which is and that's how we actually like connected is through Reason Studios DAW for making music, because we do like refills for anybody who doesn't know, which is like sound packs, and we have some of these like units that obviously you're really influenced by, and it's really great to sort of see how these things, when we bought say like these units, particularly like the Orbit, we didn't really know what it was used for. We sort of found them. You actually looked for them specifically, didn't you, Mark?
So the way I discovered Emu as a brand was we was watching a Jay-Z classic albums, because the classic album series, a documentary series, is fantastic, and there was this bright pink purple rack synth in behind DJ Premier when he was talking, and I paused the TV and went, what is that? And all I could read was Planet Fat. So I go on eBay, I type Planet Fat, and I go, oh, okay, so these are synthesizers. And I just I'm just enthralled by, the full look of the rap. Not rap, sorry.
The rack.
The rack. Yeah. And obviously, we don't make hip-hop music, right? So really, for me to be looking at this rack to buy anyway, it's not really in our ballpark, but I just thought the sounds and it was all like P-Funk demos when I listened to it. I thought these are really cool units and they do a massive amount of stuff. So we got the Planet Fat, and then slowly we got the Orbit and the Carnival, and we had like the 3 Emu racks.
That was your goal after discovering there was 3s.
Yeah, 3 coloured ones.
To have them all.
So I was like going for these 3 coloured ones that are like a matching set, really. But I just thought they looked cool, and then the sounds were really cool, and I felt like there was very easy to use, like for rack synthesizers. Some of them can be very like tough to navigate, but
like giant calculators.
A bit like a giant calculator. But the Emu ones are really easy to use. And then obviously when we started doing sampling, I said to Peter, I don't see anybody talking or using or doing packs with these. There's a few like Digital Sound Factory and stuff.
They seemed very uncommon. When you think about your Oberheims and your Moogs and your Profits, where you can take your pick of any brand's
or
version of them.
For example, there's hundreds and hundreds of 808 sample packs, but not very many of like this style of synths, like the Emu ones. And that's what I said to Peter, maybe we should do like a Rompler series of those 3 racks.
Sort of to share or to preserve maybe even the history of these racks, where there's not a lot in the digital domain like available of them. And that's really what led to it in the first place.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I mean, I've been on a hunt and I found like the Digital Factory recreations, but I found that they still kind of had like this weird conversion sound. Yeah. So I didn't really like to use them, and they have them in like sound fonts, and sound fonts don't really have the best quality. But as soon as I heard the Romplers, I was like, yeah, this is perfect. And then the Kong drums, everything was just set up like I couldn't believe it. I thought I was dreaming.
We did talk about, like, because from what you said about the Digital Sound Factory ones, I haven't actually tried them, but I think that the way the interface is on the computer is almost too similar to the rack synths, because we talk about them like they are giant calculators almost. They have push button displays and they're not very flexible in certain aspects. So what we tried to do when porting them into like Reason and using them with Kongs, we thought, well, how would people want to use them, or how can we just make that sound accessible in this workflow, particularly with things like the Kong, where you can say the kits that we've sampled, most of them aren't in that form factor, then they're not necessarily 16 sounds per kit, but we just sort of tried to figure out how to lay them out in a manner that felt like that's how they was supposed to be.
And also on the actual rack units, just finding the kick and snare is a nightmare on most of the banks of drums. You're just going, where are the kick and snare? I cannot find them.
And the move. So if you're playing them triggering them with a MIDI keyboard, the kick and the snare will often move per patch. So, say if you had a programmed beat in, say, Ableton or something, and you were sending it externally to one of these units, every time you changed the sound, you'd need to readjust the beat because all the MIDI would be going to the wrong channels, because they're sort of, even though you have what you call general MIDI, GM templates, these sort of do whatever they want. So it leaves you doing a lot more programming than music making, which is not what any of us want to do, is it? We want to make music fast and good.
Yeah, I'm trying to just jump right into it. Soon as I'm looking for the sounds, especially like I started on FL Studio. So in FL Studio, you don't really need to worry about like putting drums in a certain MIDI because you just make separate channels. But once I started using Ableton and Reasons, they have the drum racks and the Kong drums. It makes it so much easier to just cycle through different kits while you're producing, so that way you can have all these different ideas. So you guys organizing that made it so easy for me to just cycle through and like, okay, this kit sounds amazing, but let me try something else. Or sometimes just layering is easy because I can just duplicate and then switch the preset. Same areas, same sound, same style of sounds. It's perfect.
Oh, we really appreciate that. And speaking of, you say you use Ableton and Reason. Do you tend to use Reason as the new rack plugin version in Ableton? So you use Ableton for your sequencing and Reason as like the sound modules at the moment?
Yeah. I actually don't know how to use Reasons like as a standalone.
As a DAW, yeah.
It is tough.
Yeah.
Peter's really good at it, but I struggle a little bit with I struggle a lot with Ableton and a little bit with Reason. Cubase is what I typically use.
We went to a music college, Hull College in England, and a lot of people, I thought, in our class were scared of Reason because they had like Ableton, Cubase, Pro Tools, Reason, and
Logic.
Logic. I was going to say they must have had Logic somewhere. And everybody sort of gravitated either towards Pro Tools or Ableton, because obviously Ableton's like one of the first choices, I think, for most people. But then Pro Tools, because a lot of people was doing like rock music and bands, Pro Tools is the obvious choice. But people sort of looked at Reason and was a bit intimidated by it because of the hardware interface of it and everything.
And it didn't record audio either on that specific version.
At the time, yes, this will be Reason 5, so it didn't actually do audio recording yet. It didn't do that, I think, till, I might be
8
wrong.
or something.
No, I think it was 7. It could have been 6 though, but it was later on that they did audio into it. But yeah, the sequencer, I really like Reason. I make a lot of synthwave just purely in Reason as a DAW. But it took me a bit of practice, and I think it looks scarier than it is, I think, sometimes.
No, I actually think Reason is an amazing DAW. Before I started producing, I ran into someone and they were using Reason. And that's what kind of caught my eye of like making music. I was like, oh, this seems dope. Like, I want to try it. And they kind of laughed at me and they were like, yo, you're not serious. You don't want to do it. They was like, you should try this other program called FL Studio. So that's what I actually started with. So like most of the songs you've heard that were like from like, I say 2017 and back, is on FL Studio.
Okie doke, right? Yeah.
But I like Reason. Like now that I'm getting into like synths and just like going backwards in time instead of like going for like the craziest new plugin, like whatever is like closer to like that vintage sound.
Yeah.
The more I go on that path, like Reasons, they kind of have all those sounds that I'm looking for. If not in a refill, a lot of times just in the factory sounds, Like the factory Kong drums are very good, and all of the effects, everything that comes in Reasons is like what you need to just get a song done, and then you can add the other things on top. So now that I can use it as a rack VST, it makes it easier for me to like get the old school sound that I'm looking for, but then also process it with the new effects and chains.
I completely agree when you say that Reason has like the best factory sound bank. Like when I compared them all, or we use quite a lot of different DAWs. Reason has the sort of visual appeal if you're thinking like about retro aesthetics and hardware, but the sounds do not miss. Like the factory sound bank is incredible, and what the stock plugins or what the stock like rack extensions can do is phenomenal. Like when I really took a deep dive into Europa, I was blown away by how versatile it was, and I'm like, that's just a stock plugin. It's great.
Because I think with a lot of DAWs, you tend to not use the stuff that they give you with the DAW, because you're like, well, that's what came for free and I need to get external plugins and instruments, and that's sort of like just what a lot of people do with DAWs.
I think that's the sort of music producer gear acquisition syndrome part that comes in, where you're like, well, I've got, say, Ableton, but I need native instruments now. I need Complete, and you get Complete. And you're like, I need this other thing. And it's like, well, you don't really need it, but sometimes it's nice to have it.
Yeah, it's true. But and I don't really know a lot of music theory. I'm not like trained in music in any kind of way. I don't play any instrument. I kind of just go with my feeling, and I try to get a lot of tools that will help me get my ideas out. Like I love the Launchpad because I can just lock in a scale and just go, so I can kind of jam out without being tied to knowing exactly how to place my hand for these chords. And what I like about Reasons is they have a lot of these MIDI out racks, like the beat map, which is crazy for just I use like beat map for like percussional stuff, or I'll use the chord generator just to come up with ideas. It's so much in Reason, and just the other day I opened it up. I was like, I'm gonna learn it, and then I was like, it's too much.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I'm more with you, because I play drums, but obviously drums doesn't give you a lot of music theory knowledge when it comes to scales and chords. So I definitely struggle a lot more with like music theory, playing in key and all that on the keyboard. When you're trying to write an idea, I find it really difficult. But since Peter plays guitar, he's just memorized all the keys and stuff.
I memorized all of music theory. Well, not all of it, but I memorized a good chunk of it, which
makes me, when I'm sat on the keyboard trying to write something, I get really annoyed with Peter, because he's just like, oh yeah, you're using this chord progression in this key, and I'm like, well, I'm just figuring it out, basically. Is like I'm very much doing what you're doing, where you're trying to find a vibe, and then you go, yeah, no, I like this, and you're just trying to create something. You don't really understand sometimes what exactly you've done, and then Peter will come in and just be like, yeah, you've done that, and I'll be like, oh, great.
I'm not a music theory Rain Man or anything, but I've put my time in with music theory, so I know a good chunk, which helps me out. But I don't think that it's something that's necessary to make music. I actually think sometimes knowing too much theory can be like a crux, because you might listen to an idea and go, well, that's this chord progression, and this chord progression's the same as that song.
I'll say, Peter, that sounds amazing, let's make that into an idea, and he'll go, well, it's just a normal chord progression and not even bother.
one that I overuse. But the thing is, it's not about the chords, because we know all the songs use the same chords. There's only 12 notes, but when you've got theory, you might identify that you're using the same chord progression in different keys maybe, and then that might put you off using it. But you might be able to use that chord progression over and over again, like a lot of artists do, and keep getting different songs, because it's not necessarily the notes, it's how you use them, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. What I've learned on my hunt for all these old classic sounds, especially doing dancehall. Dancehall, especially in the '90s, it wasn't a lot of chords being played. It was more these like top melodies or leads.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when I'm working on these ideas, the lack of like music theory, it doesn't really matter because I could just like, do a one or two chords. And then especially stuff like using hits, like a lot of songs from back in the day was like just these hit sounds with like some kind of melodic tone surrounding it, but it just sounded so big through like processing and all that. So I'm learning how to like think very minimal.
Yes.
And just affect more and create all of these cool chains.
I think the hits thing and using, say, a sampler, like you take a chord, maybe like normally it'll be something like a major seventh or a minor seventh, and then you play that with, say, a sampler, as you're talking about, and it can move, but it creates, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it creates something called parallel chords. And so that chord doesn't change with the scale or the key or anything, but that has a sound in itself. It's a sound that a lot of people, and say like house music and stuff as well, that's a very desirable sound, but it's not necessarily a sound that would have came from music theory, because really it's breaking all the rules in a certain regard.
Yeah, because it's out of scale, right?
Yeah. All the...
And you wouldn't be able to play it on a piano, really, in the inversions that it's in.
It wouldn't be very natural to play on a piano, I wouldn't have thought, because every chord would be... I mean, maybe if you're playing in C where it's all white keys, but on a lot of the other chords, I imagine it'd get quite intense on the old hands.
Mm-hmm.
So you was involved, or you are involved, with a label / scene called Swing Ting. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So Swing Ting, they disbanded, but it was a label based in Manchester.
Yeah.
It kind of came about when, like in 2016, me and the other pioneers of FDM, we did a show for Boiler Room.
Yeah.
And it kind of went crazy after that show. A lot of people just started like reaching out and hitting us up, and there was a producing artist named Florentino that was really into my project that I had self-released on like SoundCloud and Bandcamp, and he was like, I think these guys at Swing Ting would really love to like hear your music and put a project out with you, and he sent it over. And they loved it, and we just built a good relationship. And they really helped me out understanding like how to work with labels, because before then I would just do all like self-release stuff, or I would just produce a track that would get placed with an artist, but it wasn't for me as an artist.
Yeah, because the thing with England as well is it's very small. Definitely, especially if you're coming from like an American mindset, it's a very small place, but you don't have to go far to have like a radically different sort of scene emerge. And so like Manchester, I know that I've been there quite a few times, and it's a really like big music city, I would have thought, or I would have said from being there. But it's like, again, we're sort of at the other side, we're in Hull, and it's very different. So I think it's fascinating to hear about these scenes that say like, I didn't realise that was a thing going on until I've spoken to you.
Yeah, I didn't even... I mean, you guys have... Like, it may be small, but you guys have that club culture.
Yeah.
In the UK. We don't really have that kind of... Like, there's, like, club culture and there's, like, underground culture, but it doesn't really spread the same way, I feel, like it does in the UK. So I was completely unaware of the whole UK scene and love for music until they reached out. So yeah, even you not knowing, you still knew a lot more than me.
Yeah. Well, because sort of that like flex dance music and dance hall. Dance hall is definitely a term that I've heard a lot of whilst being at college, because because of their influences and say the tutors we had. Some of them were very into stuff like dancehall because they're sort of like getting into that music historian sort of mindset when they're teaching. But I know scenes like, say, the UK drum and bass scene and house scene, and like you say, the club scene in different cities and different sort of pockets is really creative, and it goes very far considering how small England is on a map, like compared to a lot of other countries.
And there's also a mainstream element to most of those club scenes as well.
Yes,
like Radio 1's very big with drum and bass, and which is sort of like in tandem with jungle. Really, is drum and bass a lot of the time.
It's sort of like an offshoot or evolution of jungle, I believe.
And then obviously the house culture is massive in England, mainstream and like underground. So yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like dance music is the most popular genre in the UK. It didn't used to be, but I feel like it definitely is now.
100% is now, yeah.
And like you say, even where we are, we're in a smaller or a large town, smaller city, however you want to describe it. But if you go into the town centre, there is like clubs for days. There's just and every like what we would call a pub. Every pub is sort of like got their club thing going, and it's all
what's going on out there now. Like what's the scene now?
I would say that slap house is still quite big.
Yeah.
Drum and bass in the UK, I feel like is really it's still building and getting bigger and bigger. And that's not saying that it's not already popular, but I do feel like it just keeps.
Yeah, like Dimension, Subfocus, all of those, they're just everywhere. They're so popular for what you would think is like a niche genre.
And I feel like a lot of the festivals are drum and bass sort of leaning when they're doing the dance stuff, but house as well is still very popular. So I would really say the two, from my what I've been exposed to, the two biggest sort of dance genres is like house, like deep house and stuff, and really this drum and bass, this popular drum and bass stuff that's coming through.
Yeah, it's sort of like got an EDM sort of tinged drum and bass, isn't it? For some of the like Subfocus is more in that.
It's
range.
sort of gone less sample based as drum and bass and more like synth based, which I feel is odd because drum and bass, like when you think you was talking about this, it stems from breaks and break beats. But recently, they're more. I feel like they're just programming quite a lot of it, which is an interesting development. But it works really well. And when I say that, I'm talking about people like Metric and Dimension. I'm not saying they don't use breaks at all, but instead of it being break focused, it definitely feels like it's more programmed and just all in the sequence essentially.
I'm not really too familiar with all the drum and bass styles. I know it's like a lot of subgenres.
Yeah, there's tons.
I really like liquid drum and bass.
Yes,
I think that's liquid. Like my favorite.
Yeah, I've always gravitated towards liquid drum and bass over the others. We've got a friend who really loves Jump Up, and it's just it's sort of a little like drum and bass meets dubstep, sort of like that. That's what Jump Up is, but liquid. It's not soothing, but it's more in that like you can just put it on, relax.
It's smoother.
It's smooth. You can just listen to it all day. And I've always liked the liquid side of drum and bass.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, kind of. It's like R&B to me, and like it's R&B and drum and bass, and I love ethereal sounds, like just sounds that just sounds like you're in space. I'm heavy on like space and like sci-fi, so once I like find genres that have that same like ethereal feeling, it just automatically grabs me.
And I feel like that etherealness, right, this is one of the reasons why I'm always looking for these rack synths, because these ethereal pads that you often hear in like liquid drum and bass, they are on software plugins and they're all over the place of pads, but some of the rack synths that we've got, like the Romplers, they just seem to have banks and banks of these swelling and evolving pads that you just go, where is like the synths that do this? They're so unique sounding, and all of them have a different personality.
So, like, a lot of people are inspired by game soundtracks, aren't they? Like, you love Wipeout, don't you, Mark?
Yeah, Wipeout is the game. And like I say, I grew up on Wipeout, Burnout. I love Burnout 3 Takedown. And that was more like a punk rock song.
Oh, yeah, I love Burnout.
But that game was so good. And, yeah, just general racing games have always been about the music, because obviously you're going forward and they need music, otherwise the game would be boring. Like Forza has a big drum and bass soundtrack and other things. It's all a music festival on Forza Horizon. But yeah,
Need for Speed.
I've been playing the new one actually.
I remember the Need for Speed Underground 2 with Riders of the Storm by the Daws on. Every time you went into the menus, you was like,
Riders of the
Storm. That was one of my favorite ones also. I remember waking up when I was a kid and playing I had Streets of Rage 2, and I would just turn it on, and as soon as you turn it on, there's like that intro sequence where it's like telling you the backstory, but the music playing behind it is just smooth, and it's the first time I really heard like this smooth, like mellow kind of like hip hop vibes on a video game, and they use these 8-bit sounds, but there's like a whole drum beat going on behind it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Back then, I was a kid, so I didn't know I really wanted to do music, but I just was always into the way things sound.
Yeah,
it's crazy because I was also probably like 2 days ago looking up like how to make sounds that are close to like Final Fantasy, because I really love the Final Fantasy soundtrack. I feel like video games are the key too. Like video games, some people don't really pay attention to the music, but it's definitely a part of what draws you in. Like people, if you played Sonic or Mario as a kid on a Sega or a Nintendo, you know the songs. Even if you're not like fully paying attention to it, when those songs come on, you already know, okay, this is Mario, this is Sonic.
When you're growing up listening to all that type of music, it affects you when you start making music. It makes you want to chase that sound, and that's sort of where I started looking into these romplers and sound designs, because it's all ethereal keys on all those units, and that's the sound that you struggle to find sometimes. And that's just what brought me to it as well.
Yeah, like with synthwave as well, there's a full subset called Outrun, and that's based off the Sega game. I believe it's a Sega game called Outrun, and it's literally like you got people like Miami Nights 1984, and they're basically like just making game soundtracks essentially for games that don't exist. I mean, there's an artist in the synthwave scene as well called Mitch Murder, and he literally packages them like they're the games, but then there was never games. So he just like pretend soundtracks almost.
The other thing is that we only discovered what synthwave was because we played a game called Traxmania Turbo, and there was a Mitch Murder song on Mad Decent Records.
Yeah,
on that game called Breeze. And I said to Peter, what is this song? It's everything I want in like electronic music, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
At the time, I'd just started trying to make electronic music, and I was using like hashtags, like, because I was making this 80s influence stuff. I was using like hashtag 80s EDM, and I was like, nah, this isn't working, is it? Because what's 80s EDM? That doesn't make sense. And then we found this thing called synthwave. It was like, oh my God, that's the thing I'm trying to make, but I didn't know it existed. Obviously, they refined it a bit more, so I could listen to it and go, okay, so that's more where I need to be going. But you know, I was sat here trying to make
something
this 80s like modern dance music, a combination of, and I didn't realize that there was a full scene of people doing that, and some of which one of my favorite synthwave artists is called Future Cop, and he is a Manchester-based producer, and I was like, what? Well, this stuff was out here the full time, and I didn't know.
That's crazy. I honestly, I love synthwave. I started getting into synthwave probably about, honestly, like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Just doing research, and I'm constantly finding these genres that are influenced by the 80s and 90s. And when I found synthwave, I think I started looking for it when I got into Stranger Things.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like probably the second season I was like, wait, no, I need to find more music like this. It just had this like suspense, and I think that's like dark wave, or I don't know the subgenres too well.
Dark wave's like the heavier, more brooding side of it.
Yeah, I love dark sounds. Like I love ethereal sounds, but I love dark, dramatic, and big sounds. So I started getting into synthwave, and then I started learning about mid-tempo or cyberpunk.
Yeah, cyberpunk
77. 2077.
Yeah, I think the game sort of catapulted the music up to like way bigger than it had ever been, because I feel like the synthwave sort of bleeds a little bit into cyberpunk, and I feel like there's almost more cyberpunk music coming out now than there is synthwave in a way.
Yeah, it feels like a futuristic synthwave.
Yeah.
But just the sounds, the toms, like a lot of those things influence my music now. Before I would just kind of like just randomly stumble upon sounds and be like, okay, this sounds cool. But now like a lot of synthwave, lo-fi, like a lot of those textured sounds, or like I don't know what kind of reverb like you throw on the toms to get them to sound so like rich and full in synthwave, but it just brings so much energy. And when you're trying these techniques on different genres, it creates something beautiful and amazing.
So there is a trick to the tom thing, which I can tell you. It is you select your reverb, whichever one. The reverb isn't as important, although I think plates, halls will work great. The key is to put a gate on after the reverb. So you gate the reverb, but then you put a compressor on and just really squish it all together. So you get that really, really in-your-face tom sound. Then you get a really bloated, like, in-your-face reverb, and it just stops, as you would imagine. So like that's very similar to the Phil Collins, the classic "In the Air Tonight" drum fill. That's the technique he uses on that, and that's where it sort of comes from, because I think that was one of the main recordings that like started that as a trend.
Yeah, that sound is just amazing. It just, especially as a transition, it just makes the next section feel so much bigger.
I always like to do a clap on the last four in the bar, or like the last 16th note, like to transition in before the next bar starts, like when I'm changing section. That's something that I think is really unusual, but it's sort of, you hear like that clap like with the snare, and you wash it out with reverb, and it just, your brain's going, yeah, what's next? What's the next part of the song? Because you know it's coming when you hear that.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to take some classes from you. I mean, you guys sound like the two genres. I know you do synthwave and drum and bass. Those are like the genres that I'm into, and it's crazy how like we all kind of get tied back into the same similar sounds that we're finding, and it just shows you that like, back in the day when all these sounds were popular, everybody were grabbing them, but just where you were and the things you were influenced by, it changed like drastically. Like a lot of times, like I follow this guy on Instagram. His name was Blue Wave, and I think it's Blue Wave Steel. Yeah. His Instagram is like literally just like showing you iconic sounds. So like it'll be like old Pharrell song, and he'll show you like they use the Triton for this.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and what's cool is, I think you were talking about it before, like there's a lot of like these recreation plugins. So like, of course, Pharrell actually had a Triton, but now Korg has a Triton plugin.
Yes, they do.
So
yes.
That's why, circling back, you guys making these EMU romplers are perfect, because you can't find them, and they have so much like iconic sounds. And yeah, they were in like a lot of hip hop stuff, but certain sounds I'm hearing, they were in like drum and bass records, these different like sounds that were coming out in the 90s, and you can't find them anywhere. And even the units are becoming harder now, because I think gear is just becoming popular again.
And they're getting more and more expensive, aren't they?
I bought the Carnival for £80 on eBay, and now I'm seeing it for 450 sometimes on eBay.
Crazy.
And I'm like, that was a great investment from me to buy that, because I didn't know how much that price was going to skyrocket in like 3 or 4 years.
All you knew was that it was rare.
All I knew it was rare. And I just thought, right, there's one, 80 quid, I'll have it. And now I'm so glad I bought it, because they only come up like once every few months. You'll have the chance to bid on one.
Yeah. I think just nostalgia is coming back like very strong. I do video as well, and all these like vintage anamorphic lenses and filters. Everyone wants to get back to that I think it's rough around the edges texture in all forms, like in fashion. It's coming back. So, you know, a lot of times, like me, I'm not one to like hold on to things. So like I'll like buy a keyboard, and then like next year I'll be like, okay, I'm done, and I'll go sell it. But now it's just showing me more value in what I get now, because who knows, like, you know, VSTs or just a format might be done in the next couple of years, and you can't find these plugins. You have to use these old laptops that we're on now. That's going to be old then to use.
It's a very valid point, though, because you have companies like Native Instruments. They discontinued Absinthe, I'm right in thinking, very recently. So unless you already have it, it's going to be a lot harder to buy. And then if they change the operating system or whatever, it might be difficult to actually install it without running like backwards compatibility stuff.
You're at the mercy, a bit like with modern gaming now, you're at the mercy of the developer, and if they want to pull it, you can't buy it anymore. Whereas if you've got it physically, they can never pry it out of your hands. That's the difference as well.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff now, I think like they're discontinuing VST2s altogether. So
are they? I think that sounds about right, because I you know, every time you get a plugin, like I've been installing some Baby Audio stuff, and it's like, do you want the VST2s and the VST3s? And I'm like, well, surely I only need the VST3 now, right? Because everything does VST3 now, as far as I'm aware.
But a lot of companies are not even making VST2s anymore.
Yeah, I see why.
They're recreating this new, or not recreating, but they're creating this new format called Clap.
I've read about it actually. Yeah, I don't know that the ins and outs of it.
I've never heard of it until right now.
I know I've read about it. I can't remember which company it is, but yes, I know. I know the format you're talking about.
Yuhi created it, and in association with Bitwig, they created this new format. It's supposed to be like smoother, crashes less. You know, they always say these things. Yeah. But it's supposed to be like the better format now. And then I seen this company that's making, I think it's like plugins that runs on GPU.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you can get
which
more,
I'm in for
more power.
Yeah, I need that, because you know, you buy these like powerful Macs and stuff, and then you're still trying to open up like Analog Lab, and it takes like forever to load up, and because of the way they want the GUI to look, it runs, and like I'll open up Analog Lab and it takes up like 15% of my CPU with just one. So imagine if I'm trying to open up 3 or 4.
And then you've got to render the full session after you finally get going. That's the worst part. You go, right, now I'm finally getting into it, and then you're like, the computer's freezing and it's stopping and starting. It's like, right, I've got to render it all into audio.
I think most producers have a lot more like RAM and CPU and GPU than you think you should, but yet you always feel like if you're putting a lot of tracks in or you're putting a lot of plugins on, it doesn't take much before. I mean, our computer, we always say it wants to die, don't we, Mike?
Because it really does.
We're putting so many plugins on sometimes, or, you know, like, say if we're making a demo for one of the Romplers, you've got to have like
40 tracks,
40 instances of that Rompler up to do it. And it's like, well, you know, can you stop? And you're like, well, no, because you say you have unlimited tracks, and yet I put 40 tracks down and you don't want to play anymore.
But I mean, Romplers are much easier on the CPU. That's why I started dialing back on using the wavetable synths that as soon as you open up a wavetable synth, it's like just doing the most. But romplers, they're just wave shots, so it's not really taking up a lot of the CPU power, and you could just like stack up. So if you have a good computer, romplers, you could throw like 100 on them.
Yeah, and it's not doing all of the rendering like you say on a lot of the other synths where it's got this full virtual analog engine that it's trying to like replicate. It's just like, no, this is a sample and it's going to play back the same every time, or it's going to round robin every time, and it's not. It's playing, it's not generating. I suppose that's the difference from a processing standpoint.
Yeah, and then I think that also, like, I'm not a printer. Like, I hate printing my tracks because I don't know if I want to go back.
Yeah,
and everyone's like, just flatten it, just commit. But I'm like, no. So it's hard for me to print, and that's another reason why I started learning my factory sounds and learning how to use, okay, what does Ableton have? What does Reason have? Because those sounds tend to take up less CPU because they kind of, I guess, built it to be just already functional in the DAW.
Yeah, the stock plugins tend to run better because they've tested them for that. Particularly in Ableton. I know Ableton, if you're just using the stock plugins, it runs really good for the most part, no matter how much you throw at it, because it's designed to, in the simplest sort of way possible. You think, oh yeah, it's obvious, but then you think, well, you know, also Complete is designed to run in like these DAWs, so why doesn't that run as good? But it's all that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean that's another reason why I like Reason, because Reason gives you that hardware feeling. I mean that's the whole idea, right? For you to have a hardware based DAW, but it shows you a lot more with how to like set up your racks. But the plugins are so good, and I always tell people like spend time and learn your DAW before you like go out and spend money, because a lot of times you'll find out you'll have those sounds. Like honestly, and especially with the refills and the racks, it's amazing because you're buying refills, but these refills are still made out of the basic things that is in Reasons already.
Yeah.
So you're making like the combinators and stuff, but it's the stuff that you already have. Someone just took the time to put it together for you.
Yeah.
But you can make it.
Yeah, like 100%, like all the effects in most refills, stuff you already have. Like the only thing that changes is somebody might have changed the sample, but that is it. And I mean, if you have drum machines and stuff at home, you can just sample them drum machines. And the thing is it takes a lot of time, but you can do it if you have sounds that like you love. You can just commit them all down to audio and then just use the tools you already have.
Yeah. So that's like when I'm sound designing, or if I'm working on like certain sounds, like I try to find hardware that has like endless encoders or like certain like automatic faders, because I get to feel like I'm actually using the hardware with endless encoders. Like, you know, you have just a regular encoder that has a stop limit. You don't really know, but then with the endless encoders, it kind of like attaches to whatever you're turning, and you're like there with it. So I when I'm teaching people, I'm like, you know, use these sounds and effects like pedals or like these like rack mounts, because you know this is our times pedals. So now I'm like feeling, and you're understanding, and you're learning what decay does or pre-delay. You're learning how to like create these effects, and it becomes part of your style, becomes a part of your character, because everyone's like, I want to make this, I want to make that. But if I teach somebody how to make music, I'm just teaching you how to like get your ideas out. I'm not going to tell you make dancehall, make house, whatever you hear in your head, make it. But you have to learn how to be true to yourself, because with all these videos now, they're very do this, do that, and that's how you get an industry placement.
Yeah, but it's, as you say, it's more about how do you take that sound in your head and get it out. That's what it's about. It's not about mimicking or doing what these influencers necessarily say. It's more about the discipline of sort of teaching yourself how to take that idea and put it down and that's the first step. And I think that's the thing that can be most challenging for people at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of like, the industry does a lot of like dangling like fame in your face. And there's not a lot of like, I mean, even why it's hard to get the information now, there weren't a lot of people in the studio filming or talking about these things.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, you have these new producers that's just chasing the fame of what someone else has, and they don't really understand how they can create something new. And I was one of those people. I didn't know that I could make a genre or like just make a subgenre, just create the ideas and try them and see what works. I was just like making hip hop and R&B, and then when I stumbled upon the dance scene, because I wasn't, like I said, I'm not a dancer, so I wasn't really like there all the time. I started dating a dancer, and then I started seeing the world and, you know, trying those things even before like people knew me for making this style of music. I was going on an alias as like Immortal Instruments because I was like nervous of how people was going to react towards, you know, me trying this new thing.
Yeah.
And it's like a funny story is my first time making the FDM, I was too nervous to tell anybody, so I was under this alias, Immortal Instruments, but I was filming for one of the dance events, and I remember my partner at the time, they were in a battle, so I was like, you should dance to my song.
Oh yeah.
So the second round of her battle, she danced to my song, and I remember people like I'm in the crowd filming, but there's like I'm surrounded by people, and people are like, "Yo, what is this? This sounds crazy. This sounds fire." And I'm just like smiling behind the camera, like, okay, people like it.
Yeah, because you know, but they don't. That's the thing. That's interesting in that scenario, and I completely get where you're coming from, because I too, like when I've been making synthwave, I used an alias, and I didn't really connect it with myself because I just felt like it was easier to just put it all down as like its own separate thing. That's a creation that I've made, but it might not necessarily be me sometimes. And then I find a lot of people, when they do that, they sort of have this thing where they have to fight the thing they've created and themselves. They have to find, where's the middle ground? Like, how do I make the thing that I've created, like this persona, this music, me? Or how do I get closer to this persona? Because it gets to a point where you can be so disjointed, like your persona is like not even you at a certain point.
It's like Alice Cooper, or even a more modern example, The Weeknd, where they are becoming the stage version of themselves. And they're not themselves anymore. It's like, I mean, Alice Cooper's name's Vincent, but if you say, "Hey, Alice," he'll turn around and say, "Yeah." And I imagine it's like that with The Weeknd now. People say, "Oh, it's The Weeknd." Like,
it becomes you if that's like an alias, and that's like a name that you go by. And I think that's an interesting psychological thing in itself, because there's a disconnect between you and the thing you've made.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even you guys doing the research and finding out who I am and what I've done is like it's such a like crazy feeling, because when I would, like, as a kid, you know, I was looking for names, and I had the name Epic like since I like started doing music, but you know, I typed in Epic B on Google, and they would be like Epic Failure, Epic, you know, all these different things that you know, didn't have anything to do with me or my music. And I would always be like, okay, that's one of the goals of mine, just for people to be able to find out who I am.
Yeah.
And now, you know, you can do that, and it's unbelievable, because like I would say doing hip hop and R&B and all that, it's fun, and I still do those things. I still make that music to this day, but making FDM is so free. It's so free, and sometimes I get lost in it, because, you know, we don't have too many influences other than the sounds that, you know, we were influenced by, which is dancehall, but we're still making something new. So it's that freedom of being an artist that I never felt as a producer, that like now I can say, let me try this, like let me try incorporating synthwave into my sound, and people will give me the chance to hear it. It's just an amazing feeling. And you try to, I try to tell people like, just go for what you feel, and I see like how afraid they are to try something new. I just wish I could like help show them, or like, just pass that feeling on, like this is how it feels when you just fuck around, just try some shit.
You're true when you're true to yourself, and you just like you said, because you've pioneered this sort of genre, or you've helped, you're one of the pioneers of this genre. You're facing a lot less boundaries, because you as a group in the Flex dance music scene, you're the one setting them boundaries, and if you want to push them, it's a lot easier to push them, because it's your scene, if you know what I mean. Whereas in other scenes, like, you might be trying to push the boundaries, and other people in that scene might be saying, well, that's not really what this is about. But that might be a quite a negative mindset, but you don't have to worry about that, because you're doing your own thing, and like you say, it's freeing for you to just be able to blend different genres together and fuse things without feeling like there's a pressure not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the only critics is the dancers. The dancers like, nah, this one didn't hit.
Yeah, I suppose,
and it hurts.
If you do something that's like, that doesn't translate to the dance floor, I can see how that can be the main limitation. Like, you can't really mess too much with time signatures, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be doing like 9/8 and 7/8 and stuff and having people going, I can't find the one. How am I supposed to dance?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would suggest to anyone making dance music, especially because I know producers aren't the most like party goers a lot of time, but if you're not gonna DJ, go out to the clubs, because the dance floor will tell you. They'll tell you how people feel about the music.
Yes,
it definitely helps.
Yeah, you sort of have that. You can see how it moves everybody. It sounds corny, but that's the way. It's all vibration, isn't it? At the end of the day, and people move to the music, and that's how you know, like you say, that people feel something. Whereas if everybody was sort of like, well, I don't really know what to do with this, then maybe they're not actually feeling the music as much as they would something else. Yeah,
the dance floor is the main judge. If I play something and the dancer's not dancing, or I see people like going to the bathroom, or this is the time when they want to talk to their friends, I'm like, okay, maybe I got to turn that bass up or something.
Yeah, maybe something needs a small tweak. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, also you have to trust yourself, because you may be trying to appeal to certain people or a certain sound, but this track may not fit that, and sometimes you have to just trust that, like, okay, this probably was for a different aspect. And I'm learning that a lot more with like doing other things. I try to venture out. Like, I may not be like getting super sync placements, but just figuring out like the different sounds. Like, it's a lot of times I'm watching a movie, or like you're saying, like you're playing a game and you hear something and it may not be drum and bass, or it may not be synthwave, but you can see how, like, okay, what I make could fit in this video game.
Yeah.
So it gives you this sense of like, let me try something else. And you just got to keep your ears open. Like, it's so many things happening as a musician. You gotta be like open to different things. You gotta be open to different genres, learning something new, and like experimenting. It's very important. Even if you think and you have everything down packed, just go listen to something else. Like, and you can always take away something. Like, I may not like rock as much, but there's certain things that's in rock that I love, that like I probably wouldn't have heard in hip hop,
but you can translate it. It's almost like how, like, to go back to like the source of it, like Run DMC incorporating electric guitars into their music. That was something that at the time was like, wow, that's like a almost like a culture clash, but it worked, and it actually did a lot for music culture, because it showed that these two things that felt like they was on different sides of like the spectrum, they could actually join together, and you know, it made like Walk This Way, and I know that Run DMC have some other songs that incorporate a similar sort of sound set, and it shows that worked, even though on paper maybe people didn't think it would, but in reality that clash of the two genres actually made something fresh and original.
Because at the end of the day, music is just music, and everybody's trying to categorize and pull it apart and separate it, but it's just music.
Yes.
And anybody can enjoy any type of music. That's the other thing that sometimes labels love. Well, just people in general, like even like Spotify playlists and that. It's just easier to segment it all and name it all instead of just letting it be music.
It's easy to describe something if you can give it like a name, like drum and bass, or like what you're doing. It's easy to sort of unify it as a thing when it has a name. I mean, I remember when I found the name synthwave, I was like, this makes sense. Like I can just look for it and I can find it, because if you don't know how to describe something, it can be very difficult to find it. But them descriptors should be there to enable you to find the music, and not necessarily to gatekeep what that music is. It's sort of a hard thing to describe, but it's the sentiment's there. You know what I mean? The genre should help you find what you're looking for, but it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all to what that thing is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like food. Like, you know, if you're eating a certain type of steak, you know, you don't have to like make it this way all the time, but there's certain ingredients that's like in the recipe, and then you can, you know, maybe toss in some of this or toss in some of that. But just so you know, because I remember trying to find like more information on synthwave or vaporwave, and I just had to figure out these words to like know what to search up. And then you have to like you kind of have to put your mind in this like rabbit hole state to find anything sometimes.
You do. When I first got into synthwave, it was like diving into the ocean. I was like, there's so much information, and there's no information at the same time. Like all of it was very underground. There was no sort of mainstream information on it, and so you're sort of diving into the rabbit hole, but it's not a rabbit hole that, you know, there's not a trail like with certain things. Like with classic rock, there's a trail you can follow that leads you to bands like Led Zeppelin and stuff. But when you're looking at these underground newer and the genres that are sort of born from the internet, like C-punk and vaporwave, you're going into the unknown, because there isn't a path you can follow to find the people. It's more like, well, I've just got to start digging, and hopefully, like, especially when you're on stuff like Bandcamp, it seems like an endless sort of sea of artists, and as you're discovering what one thing is, you're getting pulled to the next subgenre until you end up looking at something completely different to the thing that you actually went in for, which has happened to me a lot, particularly with the synthwave, vaporwave thing. I mean, I always forget that vaporwave is the main umbrella that synthwave is a part of. I always forget that, because in my mind, synthwave is so different to vaporwave. But for a lot of people, synthwave is a subgenre of vaporwave.
Yeah, and it's hard to find information on vaporwave. Also, like, people are just like cut up samples, throw drums on it, filter it, you're done. And I'm like, but I hear more than that.
If our listeners want to check you out, Epic B, where do they need to go? Obviously, we've got Epic B on Spotify,
and there will be links in the description.
Yes, there will. Yeah, but any other things you want to shout out right at the end?
I mean, honestly, you can find me on pretty much most platforms under It's Just Epic B. So that's ITSJUSTEPICB. Bandcamp, Instagram, Twitter. Twitter, whatever.
All the socials.
Yeah, I try to keep it simple so that way people can just like look for me. But yeah, got loads of new music coming out with some artists, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see, you know, whoever's listening who loves, you know, what I'm talking about and stuff. Hit me up and let me know.
Also, if they want to get into your sort of sound design ethos, they can check out Baby Audio's BA1, where you've actually designed some of the factory sound bank.
Oh, yes. You see my name on Baby Audio's B1. I'm BA1. That was an amazing experience. Shout out to Baby Audio for hitting me up for that. Also, I have a Discord server called Planet E, where we create all types of music. We mainly focus on like underground club sounds like FDM, Jersey Club, funk, you know, just the sounds that are not mainstream sounds, but you know, stuff that you want to try. And if you got any new sounds that you're working on, you could join the Discord and put us on. But yeah, I'll send the link in for that.
Right, it's been a pleasure having you on, Epic B. Thanks for being on.
It's been an absolute joy. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.